Welcome to the Audacity to Podcast, episode 192. What can you accomplish with a podcast? Thank you for joining me for the Audacity to Podcast. I'm Daniel J. Lewis, and this is the award-winning how-to podcast about podcasting. It's where I give you the guts and teach you the tools to launch or improve your own podcast for sharing your passions and finding success. Happy National Podcast Day. September 30th is National Podcast Day, and I'm one of the co-organizers with the event. I'm really excited about this. I'm still trying to decide on what is it exactly that I want to do to celebrate National Podcast Day on the actual day. So I highly recommend, if you're hearing this before 11 a.m. on Tuesday, September 30th, 2014, then go quickly sign up on my email list because I'll announce over there what I might do that's special. I'll also announce it on Twitter at The Ramen Noodle because I'm thinking about doing some kind of live event. It might involve some free stuff. It might involve just some fun conversations about podcasting. But this episode is also in honor of National Podcast Day, because this is a day that we've set aside. It's now declared a national holiday, at least in the state of California. And it's not just for the United States, but it's an international event to call it National Podcast Day. And this is when we're celebrating podcasting. You don't have to be a podcaster to celebrate. You don't even have to know what a podcast is to celebrate National Podcast Day. You can discover what a podcast is, but if you're listening to me now, you know what a podcast is. So we've got that step taken care of already. But you could be just a podcast listener. There are so many ways you can get involved with National Podcast Day. Just go to nationalpodcastday.com to see a bunch of suggestions. But here in this episode of the Audacity to Podcast, I want to talk about an aspect of podcasting that's not so much the technical, but a little bit more of the guts, the inspiration of what draws us to podcasting. And that is, what can you accomplish with a podcast? I've got 4 amazing things that you can accomplish with your podcast. And you could do this right now. If you start a podcast, you could accomplish these things. Or maybe you're podcasting and you can realize, boy, this is some inspirational stuff. I got to get this going and start doing some of these amazing things with my podcast. Because if you're not trying to influence for good with your podcast, if you're not doing any of these amazing things, really, then why are you podcasting? And that sounds like I've got a really high standard to say you shouldn't be podcasting unless this. But no, there's some stuff in here that applies whether you are a professional podcaster trying to focus on growing a business or just a hobbyist podcaster just for the sake of having fun and doing something with your friends or family. So 4 amazing things you can accomplish with a podcast. If you'd like to follow along, the show notes are at theaudacitytopodcast.com/192. Number 1, find your success for a business or a hobby. In 1878, Margaret Wolfe Hungerford, also known as the Duchess, is the first person recorded with saying the phrase, "Beauty is in the eye of the beholder." She said that in her book called Molly Bawnand. I like to say success is in the mind of the pursuer. In other words, you define your own success. This is all about what you want to accomplish. So your podcast can help you find success, but how are you defining success? Success could mean becoming famous, or it could mean you're earning a living from your podcast or from a business that's associated with your podcast or built from your podcast. Maybe success just means finding other people like yourself to discover you're not alone in this world. Maybe success is finding a particular audience size and having a great influence over hundreds or thousands of people, or even maybe just 20 people coming to hear you every week or every day or however frequently you publish your content. Or maybe success to you is just having fun, recording an episode and afterward feeling like, boy, that was a lot of fun. I can't wait until I do the next one. That can be success to you. Your success is totally yours to invent. But whatever you do, don't try to pursue someone else's success. It's very easy to get tempted to do this when we see people like Pat Flynn, John Lee Dumas, Michael Hyatt, and many great business podcasters, Leo Laporte, many people making lots of money from their podcast and doing amazing things through their podcast. Don't try to pursue their success. Invent your own success. I define my personal success as running a business that I enjoy, that supports the life that I love. I want to be known in my industry. I want to keynote events. I want to generate enough consistent income that I can pay off my mortgage and be generous to others. I'm already accomplishing this and many other things in my business. So I do see myself as succeeding already. My success isn't the same as everyone else's success, but it is success to me. So how is it that you define success? And that is your success. Do not try to think, yes, I want to succeed like so-and-so or anything like that. Think of it for you. Maybe it's not making $100,000 a year. Maybe you would be content with just $50,000 a year. My standards are a lot lower than other people's standards for income. And so I'm not even sure I would know what to do if I was making the same amount of income as other people. I'd probably end up giving a lot of it away, which is something I want to do when we start making more income, is giving away more things. So this doesn't matter if you're doing your podcast as a business or some aspect of a profession that you hold, or if you're doing it as just a hobby. What is your success? For a hobby, success to you might just be learning more about this craft or getting to meet other cool people or whatever it could be. So find your own success. And how do you define your success? I really want to hear some great comments from you in the show notes. So please go to theaudacitypodcast.com/192. And I have a question on each of these points. So question number 1, how do you define your success? Please answer that in the comments in the show notes over there at theaudacitypodcast.com/192. So this is number 1 thing that you can accomplish with a podcast. Find your success for a business or hobby. Number 2, build relationships. Podcasting is really quite a personal medium when you compare it to everything else out there, because regardless of whether you're publishing audio or video, you are primarily communicating with your voice. Yes, your face might also be there if you're doing video, but still, people are there to listen to your voice primarily. So they do this in all kinds of contexts. It might be while they're working at their office job or some other kind of job. It might be while they're driving in the car, while they're relaxing, while they're mowing the yard, while they're just playing, and much more. Sometimes they're listening to your voice and inviting you into their lives when no one else and where no one else is ever allowed. Come on. You know that there are commode content consumers out there. We can call them the C3s of the world. People are listening, and it's very personal then because they're listening and sometimes watching too in all of these different contexts. And this makes your connection with your audience not only personal because you're using your own voice, but because of how much they consume your content and how often they take your voice and your opinions with them and how faithfully they tend to consume your content. This makes your connection with them, even at least on a low level, an intimate connection with them. When you treat this well, you can nurture these connections into actual relationships. They can become business relationships. Maybe you do something together, you do something that helps each other. They buy a service or product from you, or you buy a service or product from them. Maybe you co-host something together, you partner in some way. Maybe it's friendships where you get to know people. There are so many people that I can't even put a number on it anymore. I don't have the time to list all of the great friends that I've made through podcasting. Some very close friends, and I really appreciate the friendships and relationships that I have. Your relationships could also be that of support, business support, accountability, moral support, whatever. And even in rare circumstances, the kinds of relationships you could build with your podcast could even lead to marriage. Yes, it's happened before, not very often, but it has happened before, and it can and will happen again. These relationships aren't just between you and your audience, but they can also be among your audience members. This is what turns your audience into a community of its own growing relationships. And from this community, each person can then build these kinds of relationships with each other. They could build business partnerships. They could build friendships with each other. They might get married to each other. That's happened before. It'll happen again. I've seen these relationships do amazing things, incredible things. And I'm not just talking about business relationships or money that's been made, but people have collaborated on some really creative art. They've built strong friendships. They've held each other accountable through really hard times, uplifted each other from the community. There have been people that have been saved from committing suicide thanks to the relationships that they have had through community, the relationships with podcast hosts or with the other podcast listeners or watchers, the community out there. Building relationships is a huge, amazing thing that you can do with your podcast. So here is question number 2. What kind of relationships do you want to build? Either with your audience directly or with your audience among each other. Please comment on the show notes at theaudacitypodcast.com/192. That's number 2, build relationships. Number 3, change lives. Relationships give you an incredible opportunity to influence others, but even without knowing every audience member that you have and having a personal relationship with them, you still can be a respected influencer and change people's lives and ultimately change the world with your podcast. Think of the podcasts that you've watched or that you've listened to and how they've changed your life in some way. Did you find some way to better manage your time, or did you work yourself out of some kind of pit in your life, like out of debt, out of depression, out of some hardship? Were you inspired to hold on to hope in some way? Or have you been motivated and even equipped and empowered to accomplish a goal? I can easily say yes to each of these questions because podcasts have changed my lives in that same way. So how has listening to podcasts changed your life? That's not the question necessarily to answer, but definitely that would be great to answer in the show notes. I'd love to hear your comments there. But look for ways that you can change others' lives in these ways and many other ways. If you want to change the world for good, then start by having a positive impact one person at a time. I highly recommend that you go listen to Cliff Ravenscraft's keynote from Podcast Movement 2014. He did this in Podcast Answer Man episode number 370, and I have a link to this in the show notes over at theaudacitypodcast.com/192. But definitely listen to it. His talk was 4 strategies for changing the world with your podcasting efforts, how you can make a powerful, positive difference in the lives of those who listen to your show. You can change lives just by talking into a microphone each week. And it doesn't mean you have to have this motivational message or this deeply emotional subject or anything like that. You don't have to be success focused to change lives. You just have to build relationships and be authentic and do something positive, or in just 2 words, positive impact. Do that one person at a time, and you could change the world with your efforts. So I want to know, this is number 3, how have podcasts changed your life, and how can you use your podcast to change others? Please comment on the show notes, theaudacitypodcast.com/192. So number 3, change lives. Number 4, have fun. Don't forget that podcasting can be loads of fun. As podcasters, we get to talk about the stuff that we really love. We use this word so much now. It's so synonymous with podcasting, and that is our passions. We're talking about our passions, and we get to discover other people do exist who share our same interests. And because of this, we get to do some really cool things sometimes because of my Once Upon a Time podcast, I've gotten to talk to a couple of the actors from the show and have a lot of fun doing it. Not just a serious conversation talking about success or anything, but having fun, laughing, getting to know them, sharing things with our community. It's a lot of fun to podcast. We've done other things like with our clean comedy podcast. That can be a lot of fun. Laughter is good medicine. It is good for the soul. And that doesn't mean you have to laugh in your podcast, but look for ways that you can have fun with this. If you're passionate about this, you'll enjoy doing this. Those two really go together. You can't say, yeah, my passion is this, and when you pursue it, it feel like a total burden and a bore to you. And you shouldn't really sound like that either. If you are passionate about a subject, but people think you sound boring, then maybe change your approach. Maybe you're trying to pursue someone else's model instead of your own model. But it's okay if you don't enjoy what you podcast about anymore. That's a great sign that maybe you should stop. I've talked about this in the past, and I'll have a link to a relevant episode in the show notes, but there are things you can do if you just don't feel like continuing on with your podcast. But sometimes you do just need to stop the current topic that you're talking about or the current podcast you're hosting. Find a new passion. Share that with your audience then, and they will probably follow you as long as it is an authentic passion you have that you want to talk about and you have some plan of where you're going to go with that. So remember, this is number 4. Have fun with your podcast. This is an amazing thing that podcasting can do, even if you treat it as a business. Of course, if you treat it as a hobby, fun is probably the ultimate goal, and that might be the only reason you podcast. That's perfectly okay. That's what got me into podcasting, is I just felt like I've got some funny stories I want to tell. I enjoy making other people laugh. Podcasting sounds like lots of fun. So I'll start a clean comedy podcast. It was called The Ramen Noodle. I started it in 2007, and I still host that podcast to this day. And I really enjoy that podcast. It's a lot of fun. And our Once Upon a Time show we do because it's fun. I enjoy the TV show, and it just came back for its 4th season. So the energy is up again, and we just saw it last night. And I'm excited to be back in that podcasting seat as well. So question number 4, a couple questions for number 4. How do you have fun with your podcast? And do you really enjoy what you talk about? Consider that one for yourself. You don't necessarily have to answer that one publicly, but do you really enjoy this? If not, maybe you should find something else. But how is it that you're having fun with your podcast? So these 4 amazing things you can accomplish with your podcast are: number 1, find your success for a business or a hobby. Number 2, build relationships. Number 3, change lives. And number 4, have fun. There's nothing wrong with having fun with your podcast. Please comment on the show notes, answer these questions. Let me know how you change the world, have a positive impact, and what great things you're trying to accomplish or have accomplished with your podcast. Please comment on the show notes over at theaudacitypodcast.com/192. I've got one announcement for you, and this episode is kind of short because I'm so excited. I'm really eager to move on to the next thing to prepare for this and celebrate, and that is National Podcast Day. Visit nationalpodcastday.com. This is on September 30th, and this is really an international event celebrating podcasting. There are a lot of events going on. We're going to have a podcasters roundtable talking about National Podcast Day and the history of podcasting. There are live streaming events starting even just today. Some great things. Paul Colligan, one of the original podcasters, is going to host a free How to Podcast event. Todd Cochran has talked about doing some live streaming events about podcasting. I'm thinking about doing some live events. There's so much cool stuff going on, and it's just the first year. So go over to nationalpodcastday.com to see all of the awesome events. And even if it's after the event, which it might be very possible you're listening to this after September 30th, still go to National Podcast Day and you can check out the stuff that you missed and find out how you can participate to make next year even better. So go to nationalpodcastday.com and help the world find out about podcasting. This has been a short episode, and I want you to take action with the extra time that you might have because this episode was short. Celebrate National Podcast Day in one way or another. Here is one simple suggestion. Go out and review 5 podcasts on National Podcast Day and go talk to at least one other person and tell them about podcasts and get them subscribed to a podcast. Maybe that means showing them how to subscribe to a podcast on their device or finding their favorite topic and a podcast for that topic that they love to discuss or that they're really interested in. Celebrate National Podcast Day together and let's help build podcasting to become even greater year by year by year. Go to nationalpodcastday.com for more information. Again, I'd love to hear from you, so please comment on the show notes with your answers to some of these questions. Those notes are at theaudacitypodcast.com/192. I didn't receive any podcast reviews this week, but if you would like to get your own reviews automatically emailed to you from iTunes and some other little network that has something to do with sewing, that's coming soon, go over to mypodcastreviews.com and you can review my show at theaudacitypodcast.com/iTunes or /Stitcher. Now that I've given you some of the guts and taught you some of the tools, it's time for you to go launch or improve your own podcast for sharing your passions and finding success. I'm Daniel J. Lewis from theaudacitypodcast.com. Thank you for listening. The Audacity to Podcast is a proud member of Noodle Mix Network. Find more of our award-winning